First time I woke up on the bathroom floor. My husband told me I'd had too much wine. I believed him. I mean, why wouldn't I? I was 31 years old, newly married, living in a beautiful craftsman house in Asheville, North Carolina, with a man I dated for 4 years before he got down on one knee at Chimney Rock. I had a job I loved, third-grade teacher at Oakwood Elementary. I had a life that looked, from the outside, like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. And I had a habit, apparently, of drinking too much at dinner parties and embarrassing myself. That was the story my husband told. And for almost 8 months, it was the story I believed about myself. His name was Greg. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party when I was 26. He was charming in the way that some men are, not loud about it, not showy. Quiet charming. The kind of man who remembers how you take your coffee and shows up with it unasked. The kind of man who holds your hand during scary movies even when you pretend you're not scared. I fell for him the way you fall when you don't see the step fast. And a little shocked by the landing. We got married on a Saturday in October. The leaves were orange and gold, and the whole thing felt like something out of a movie I'd have watched as a teenager and cried over. The dinner party started about 3 months into our marriage. Greg had a close friend, someone he'd known since college, a woman named Serena, who lived 2 miles from us with her boyfriend. Serena was the kind of person who made everything look effortless. Her house always smelled like something was baking. She had strong opinions about wine and soft opinions about everything else. I liked her, actually. Or I thought I did. Every third Saturday of the month we'd go to their place. It was our thing, the 4 of us. Dinner, a bottle of something nice, conversation that went too late. And every single time I left feeling like the floor was tilting under me. The first time, Greg helped me to the car, and I pressed my face against the cool glass of the window and thought, okay, I overdid it. The second time, I counted my drinks. 2 glasses, maybe 2.5, and still felt the same heavy, foggy wrongness. I mentioned it to Greg. He shrugged and said Serena's pores were generous, that she didn't measure. I nodded. That made sense, right? Serena was the kind of person who didn't measure. The third time, I barely finished 1 glass and still ended up needing Greg to half carry me to bed when we got home. I woke up at 4 in the morning with a headache that sat behind my eyes like something pressing from the inside, and I lay there in the dark and thought, something is wrong with me. I went to my doctor in February. She ran blood work, checked my liver function, asked about my sleep and stress. Everything came back normal. She suggested I might be developing a sensitivity to sulfites in wine and told me to try switching to white. I nodded and thanked her and drove home feeling relieved to have an explanation, even a small one. The next dinner party, I drank white wine instead of red. Same result. I started to wonder if I was developing some kind of anxiety disorder that was mimicking intoxication. I Googled it at midnight more than once, sitting in the dark on the edge of the bathtub, because I didn't want Greg to see me spiraling. He was so calm about all of it, patient even. He'd rub my back when I woke up disoriented and bring me water and say, "It's okay, honey, it happens." Looking back, that patience should have been its own kind of alarm. The month that changed everything was March. I'd been at school all week dealing with a particularly hard situation. One of my students was going through something at home, and I'd been staying late, writing reports, making phone calls. By the time Saturday arrived, I was genuinely exhausted. Not the foggy, chemically wrong exhaustion I'd been carrying for months. Real exhaustion, the kind that sits in your shoulders and behind your eyes. I thought about canceling. I almost texted Greg that I just wanted to stay home, but he was already dressed, already looking forward to it, and I didn't want to be the person who made us miss yet another thing because I wasn't feeling well. So I went. But at the table, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to drink. Not a single sip. I was going to eat dinner and drink water and watch everyone else and see what happened. What happened was nothing. I sat through 4 hours of dinner and conversation and dessert, and I felt exactly the way I always feel. Present, tired in a normal way, but fine. Clear. When we got in the car to drive home, I realized my hands weren't shaking. My vision wasn't blurring. My head didn't feel like it was wrapped in wet cotton. I felt like myself. I sat with that the whole drive home. Greg was talking about something, some story Serena's boyfriend had told, and I was nodding and making the right noises, and internally, I was doing a kind of slow, cold math. Every time I had one of these episodes, I had been drinking something Greg poured for me. Greg always poured my drinks. He'd done it from the beginning. It was one of those small, sweet habits I'd associated with him being attentive. He'd take my glass, go to the kitchen or the bar cart, and come back with something. Always topped off before I asked. Always exactly right. Except it wasn't wine he was giving me, or not only wine. I didn't say anything that night. I went inside and brushed my teeth and got into bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about the way he'd looked at me across Serena's table that evening. Once, maybe twice, a small flicker of something I couldn't name. Checking. He'd been checking to see if I was starting to feel it, and I hadn't, because I hadn't drunk anything he gave me. The next morning, I waited until he left for his run, and then I went through the cabinet above the refrigerator where he kept his things. A toolbox, some tax documents, a box of miscellaneous stuff he'd never fully unpacked from when he moved in. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Some part of me was hoping to find nothing. I found a small orange prescription bottle. The label had been peeled off. Inside were capsules, white, generic looking. I took a photo of them with my phone. Then I put everything back exactly the way I found it, and went downstairs and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and tried very hard not to let my hands shake. I called my best friend that afternoon while Greg was at the grocery store. Her name is Ren, and she is the kind of person who, when you tell her something impossible, doesn't immediately try to talk you out of it. She listened to the whole thing, all 8 months of it, the episodes, the doctor visit, the dinner party where nothing happened because I didn't drink what he gave me, the bottle in the cabinet. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said, "Do not tell him you know. Don't change anything. We need to get those pills tested. Ren works in healthcare administration. She knows people." 3 days later, I got 2 of the capsules out of the bottle and sealed them in a small Ziploc bag and mailed them to a contact she had at a private lab in Charlotte. I spent the next 2 weeks doing 2 things at once. On the surface, I was a normal life. I went to work and came home and cooked dinner and watched TV and asked Greg about his day. Underneath, I was a different person entirely. I was going through every memory of the past 8 months and seeing it through a different lens, and what I saw made my stomach turn. The way Serena would always disappear into the kitchen with Greg when refills were needed. The way my episodes had only ever happened at their house, or the one time they came to ours for dinner and Greg had served drinks all evening. The way he never pushed me to drink, exactly, just poured and placed and was attentive and kind about it. The lab results came back on a Thursday. Ren called me at 7 in the morning before I left for school. She spoke carefully, the way you speak when you're trying not to alarm someone who is already alarmed. The capsules contained zolpidem, generic Ambien, at a higher than prescribed dose. Not enough to kill someone. Enough to make them deeply sedated and foggy and confused. Enough to make them seem drunk. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time after that call. The thing about learning something like this is that it splits your life neatly in two. There is everything before that Thursday morning and everything after. And the version of you who existed before feels like someone you barely knew. Naive in a way that makes you want to reach back through time and grab her by the shoulders. I went to school that day. I taught long division and read aloud from Charlotte's Web and helped a kid named Marcus with his handwriting. I was present for all of it and I don't remember any of it. What I remember is that during recess, I sat at my desk and wrote down everything, dates, incidents, the lab results, the photos of the pill bottle, in a Google Doc that I shared only with Ren. After school, I drove to a law office on Merriman Avenue that Ren had already found. I sat across from an attorney, Mr. Calloway, and laid out everything I had. He was a quiet, careful man, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said that what I was describing was criminal, domestic poisoning, which falls under assault and battery in North Carolina and carries felony charges. He told me that what I did next mattered enormously, and that I should not confront Greg, should not change my behavior, and should go to the police with documentation. I drove home that evening and made pasta for dinner. Greg poured me a glass of wine and set it on the table in front of me. I smiled and said thank you and moved it slightly, and after dinner I poured it down the drain while he was loading the dishwasher. I slept in our bed that night and listened to him breathing and thought about the person I had married, and what he was, underneath the quiet charm and the morning coffee he always remembered, and the way he held my hand during movies. I went to the Asheville Police Department the following Tuesday morning before school. I brought my phone with the photos, the lab report Ren had forwarded me, the Google Doc with the incident log, and a printed receipt from the lab. The detective who took my statement was a woman in her late 40s with short gray hair and an expression that did not change while I talked, which I found oddly comforting. When I finished, she said they would open an investigation and that I needed to continue acting normally at home. "Is there any chance," I asked, "that he's going to figure out what I'm doing?" "Not if you don't tell him," she said. "And not if you keep doing what you've been doing." What I'd been doing, it turned out, was building a case without realizing it. Every date in my incident log corresponded to a Saturday we'd spent at Serena's house or had them over to ours. The police, over the following 3 weeks, did their own work. They pulled Greg's pharmacy records. He didn't have a prescription for Zolpidem. Serena's boyfriend did, and he'd been picking up refills every month for a year, despite no medical appointments corresponding to those refills. They searched Serena's house on a Thursday in April with a warrant. They found a prescription bottle with his name on it in her nightstand that was nearly empty despite having been filled 11 days earlier. They arrested Greg at his office that afternoon. He was a financial planner. He worked in a glass-walled office in a building downtown, and according to what came out later, the arresting officers let him finish the meeting he was in before they came in. I don't know why that detail stuck with me. Maybe because it felt so ordinary. He was in a meeting. He had a client. He had a whole ordinary professional life while he was coming home every third Saturday and watching me try to pour my altered wine down my throat. They arrested Serena 3 hours later. I found out when the detective called me at 4:37 in the afternoon while I was sitting in the school parking lot unable to drive. She told me calmly, the way she'd done everything, and I said thank you and hung up and sat there for a long time. My sister drove up from Greenville that night. She's 4 years older than me and has always been the practical one, the one who makes lists and handles things. She showed up with a bag, a box of groceries, and the specific expression she gets when she's trying very hard not to cry in front of you. She hugged me for a long time in the doorway. "What do you need?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "I just know I don't want to be alone in this house tonight." She stayed for 2 weeks. The investigation uncovered things that I have since had to decide, consciously and repeatedly, not to spend my life turning over. Greg and Serena had been involved for at least 2 years, starting almost a year before our wedding. Her boyfriend knew. He had provided the prescription, gotten refills, been part of it. What they wanted, as far as the police could reconstruct, was the life insurance policy Greg had taken out on me 14 months into our marriage. A $750,000 policy with Greg as the sole beneficiary. The plan wasn't to kill me with a single dose. That would have been too obvious, too sudden. The plan was to build a pattern. The wife who drank too much, who kept having these incidents, who her own doctor had seen. The plan was that eventually there would be a night where the dose was a little higher, or the circumstances a little different, and it would look like an accident, like a tragedy. Like a woman who just couldn't handle her wine finally went too far. It makes me sick to write that. It makes me sick every time I think about it. The DA's office filed charges on all 3 of them. Greg faced 2 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and additional charges related to the insurance fraud. Serena and her boyfriend faced conspiracy charges and charges related to obtaining a controlled substance by fraud. The trial was 8 months later. I testified for 2.5 hours. I practiced with the DA's team 3 times beforehand, going through my account, the documents, the lab report. When I sat in that witness stand and looked at Greg across the courtroom, he looked like a stranger. He had always had a particular way of looking at me, attentive, warm. In the courtroom, he didn't look at me at all. He looked at his hands. The jury came back in 4 days. Greg was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 years. Serena received 12 years. Her boyfriend, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received 5 years with eligibility for parole. The judge, in his remarks before sentencing, said something that I have carried with me. He said that what made this crime particularly serious was not only its duration or its intent, but its intimacy, the use of trust as a weapon, the exploitation of ordinary love as a mechanism for harm. I had to look away when he said that. I filed for divorce while Greg was awaiting sentencing. The marriage was annulled on grounds of fraud. In North Carolina, if a marriage was entered into based on false pretenses, there are grounds for annulment, not just divorce. My attorney walked me through it. I was grateful for the specificity of it, the legal clarity that said, this was never what it appeared to be. I stayed in Asheville. Some people asked if I would leave. Start over somewhere new, different city, different scenery. My sister thought maybe it would help, but Oakwood Elementary is still there, and Marcus has gotten significantly better at his handwriting, and my classroom smells like dry erase markers and the particular dusty warmth of 38-year-olds who've been running around at recess. I kept the house. I redecorated the living room. I don't go to dinner parties very often anymore, not because I'm afraid exactly, more because I've become, over the past year and a half, very selective about whose table I sit at and what I let myself consume. That's not a metaphor. Or maybe it is. I'm still working out which. What I know is this. I almost let someone else's story about me become the story I believed. The story where I was, the problem, fragile, unreliable, a woman with a drinking issue who needed managing. I came very close to living inside that story for the rest of what might have been a short life. The thing that saved me was a single night of not drinking. Not a detective. Not a revelation. Not someone writing in to explain what was happening to me. Just me, sitting at a table, quietly deciding to trust the thing my body had been trying to tell me for 8 months. I don't take that lightly. I won't. There's a particular kind of shame that comes of being fooled by someone you loved, not the loud, dramatic shame of a public humiliation, the quiet kind. The kind that sits with you at 4 in the morning and asks, how did you not see it? I've spent a lot of time with that question, and what I've come to understand is that I didn't miss the signs because I was stupid. I missed them because I was trusting, and for a long time I confused those two things. Greg counted on that. He understood that the most effective lies are the ones dressed in care, the wine poured before you ask, the hand on your back, the patient voice that says, it's okay, honey, it happens. He used the ordinary language of love as a cover for something that had nothing to do with love at all. That's not a failure of my intelligence. That's a failure of his character. And those are not the same thing. What I know now, and what took me longer to learn than I'd like to admit, is that your instincts are a form of intelligence too. My body was telling me something was wrong for 8 months. 8 months of waking up disoriented, of counting my drinks, of sitting in doctors' offices looking for explanations that were never going to be found in my blood work. The information was there. What I had to develop was the willingness to trust it, even when the person I was married to was offering me a perfectly reasonable alternative explanation. That willingness, I think, is a kind of courage that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the dramatic courage of confrontation or escape, the quieter kind, the courage to sit at a dinner table and decide, privately, without telling anyone, that you are going to stop drinking what he gives you and see what happens. To trust your own read of a situation over the comfort of a simpler story. Ren is the one who kept me from doing something reckless with what I knew. When I called her that afternoon, shaking in a way I didn't let my voice show, she didn't panic. She thought. She knew that what I needed wasn't a scene. It was documentation. Evidence. A case that would hold. The difference between the outcome I got and a much worse one came down to that. Someone with enough clarity to say, not yet, and not like this. I think about that often. About how the way you respond to a crisis matters as much as whether you respond at all. Greg and Serena had been planning for months. They had patience. The only way to beat that was to be more careful, not less. The judge said that what made the crime serious was its intimacy, the use of trust as a weapon. I've turned that phrase over many times since the trial, because I think the reverse is also true. What made it survivable was intimacy too. The trust I eventually placed in Ren, in my sister, in my own body's signals, in a detective with short gray hair who listened without changing her expression. Trust, extended carefully and in the right direction, is what undid all of it. I'm still in Asheville. I still teach 3rd grade. I redecorated the living room in January, and I like it better now. I don't think of myself as someone who survived something. I think of myself as someone who figured something out, slowly, imperfectly, with help. but I figured it out. And that distinction matters to me more than I can fully explain.